I'm Dennis Clifford, and I'm a retired professional basketball player helping people escape chronic joint pain. My guest today is Hank Degroat, a U.S. Army combat veteran, a Jiu Jitsu Black Belt, a certified strength and conditioning specialist, and a licensed massage therapist. And he is a healer. If you ask anyone in Boston athletics, he is the guy that you go to when all else fails. This episode is very close to home for me because if you know my story, you know that Hank is the guy that saved my life and my basketball career. If you don't know, I'll give you the SparkNotes version real quick just because I think it really sets the stage for what we're going to talk about in this episode. Like many others, I came out of high school with NBA aspirations, and after a pretty solid freshman year at Boston College, those aspirations were getting more and more believable, at least in my eyes. The summer going into sophomore year, I was running a 5-minute mile, and I broke the squat record for basketball players at Boston College. I was playing my best basketball, and then a week later, I hurt my knee. Not knowing how bad it was, I played my entire sophomore year hurt. Everything gets worse and worse, and my entire life becomes a downward spiral. Hurt for 2 years, 2 knee surgeries, and then being diagnosed by multiple doctors with chronic conditions and degenerative diseases was the nail in the coffin for my entire career and my life up to that point. Multiple doctors said that I would not recover from this and that I had the choice to either fight through the debilitating pain on a daily basis or to just give up. I lost myself completely. I shut out my team, my coaches, even my own family and friends. This was the hardest thing that I have ever had to go through until the day that I met Hank. I randomly get a text from my high school assistant basketball coach. We have an appointment tomorrow at 6 a.m. I'll pick you up at 5. I had no idea what to expect, but whenever I tell my story, I say that this is the most important day of my life. It was the rebirth of Dennis Clifford, aka Lazarus. Now, as we discuss in this episode, there is no one formula for how chronic pain and injury occurs, and there are no magical exercises. But as Hank elaborates, there are things that anyone and everyone can do on a daily basis in order to build and restore athleticism and speed up the recovery process. In this episode, we discuss our first impressions of each other, how he earns trust while operating outside of conventional medicine, navigating and understanding the mental aspect of sports, empowering athletes, and providing hope to those dealing with chronic pain, and finally some actionable advice for those rehabbing injuries or dealing with chronic pain. If you are somebody dealing with pain, overuse injuries, or you are simply trying to improve your sports performance while limiting your risk of injury, by the end of this episode, you should have a clear understanding of the mind and body, and you will be empowered to take more from all those online fitness programs and Instagram exercises that we all know and love. Hank has a private practice in the Metro Boston area, and he has also written a couple of cool-ass books. I will link those in the description below. Finally, before we get started, if you enjoy listening, please comment and share so you can help spread the hidden treasure of information and help your boy justify the hours I spent on editing this podcast. All right, that's all. Let's get it. So let's jump right into it. All right, Hank, on a random morning, 2013, you're working out of the Westin in Waltham?
Actually, it was the courtyard.
The courtyard. And so
Yep.
now you see me walk in, limping, depressed. What are your first impressions of me and of any client when they come in looking like shit?
Well, the first thing I'm looking at, and the first thing I saw with you was I was just like, this kid's spirit's broken. I mean, I was told, hey, I got, the 7-footers coming, da-da-da-da-da. You didn't look anywhere near 7 feet, brother. you look like a worn out 6-inch shooting guard. I mean, you did not look like, I mean, you were just slumped in and, you were not moving well at all. And I knew that this was a rebuild that was going to be beyond just, oh, we got an ankle sprain here. Let's get you up and running. Right. And I think there's a motto. So I might reference this a number of times, but for a chunk of my career, I managed a team of 35 other trainers and, help them build and run their businesses. And one of the things, the mottos that I've picked up through the years that I would pass on to them is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Right. And I knew like I said, this wasn't going to be we just got to get your shoulder going and get you back out there. I could tell this was going to be a big reboot. And so I want to hear everybody's story when they come in. I want to okay, why are you here today? Why are you seeking me out? I might have heard it from a parent. I might have heard it from a spouse, a coach, or whoever, but you in front of me right now, why are you here? And that just starts to unwind a whole bunch of things. right? And so when I first saw you walk in, I could just tell you really didn't have hope because you really had felt like, look, I did everything everybody told me to do, and this is where I ended up. And this is like nowhere near where I thought I was going. Like I thought my trajectory was going this way, and now I'm here, and I don't even think like up. There's no reason to look up because I'm not going up. And so my biggest, the first thing I want to do with a client that, particularly like you, that's lacking that hope or is just frustrated with a chronic issue, is to give them hope and to show them what you're experiencing. Hey, it's valid, but let's have a little win here.
Mhm.
So whatever that might be, like, all right, well, show me what hurts. Just show me a movement that hurts. And I can usually see all of that, right? Because, you do this for 25 years, like you pick up on patterns, right? But
Yeah.
I want them to see it and feel it. And then we might do something on the table or something else. And I'll go, all right, do that thing again. And they go, oh, oh. And I go, see, like you're not stuck here. You're stuck here because, if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you got. But let's start looking at this from different angles and let's start taking different approaches. And so when I first saw you, I knew that this was going to be one of those things that from the beginning, I had to give you a sense of hope, and just build from there because I didn't know where it could go. Because as soon as you start having operations, as soon as you start moving things around, well, there is no quote unquote normal. And, it's a rebuilding process. So I was excited, to get
How
going and to see what we could do.
how often do you see people in that mental state of mind? Because at least in my experience so far, for somebody to hit me up on Instagram, it
Yeah.
it usually takes a lot. So there is like a high barrier to hit some guy up on Instagram that's talking about posture and talking about all these weird exercise stuff.
Right.
So I think I do see that a lot out of people.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to what you just said, right? By the time, well, and that's the other thing too. Because I'm not in the majority of athlete circles, right? And I'm not in a medical circle, right? People come to me because somebody told them, right? Hey, and how did they either saw it, like there's two ways generally that people come to me. The number of times I've had a parent call me and go, my daughter just rolled their ankle, and I had 3 people come up to me in the stands and give me your name. Can you help? Right? And, or, somebody will be talking with somebody else about chronic X, and there have been somebody that I had worked with, and they'll go, oh, you need to go see Hank. And they'll be like, oh no, well, I've done this, 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 and this. And they'll be like, no, you need to go see Hank. Right?
Yeah.
And so when people do come to me and for those types of things, and if you're speaking to an audience that's dealing with chronic things, by the time they've exhausted the traditional routes and they get to you, I don't know if the barrier is really, if they're truly seeking performance, I would say the barrier is less because they're used to pushing through doors by that point, right? But if they're just deep in depression because they've tried all the different steps and they're like, I've heard it all before. I've chased a million Instagram, commercials down rabbit holes, or I've been to this
Yeah.
PT or that PT or that doc, and that's what, that's not a fun place to be.
No.
Not a fun place
Yeah,
to
we've
be.
been there. So one of the questions it's crazy how much detail I remember from that day. One of the first questions you asked me was, what is wrong with you, in your own words? And then I went through the script of what other people were telling me throughout the 2-year process. And that goes back to like having no hope, is like, I heard the same things, even though I got second and third opinions. This is not a knock on the medical industry at all, but I
Right.
was hearing the same things. And again, I had no hope. So when you asked me, I remember being like, well, I was diagnosed with this and this and this. And you cut me off and you're like, no, like in your own words, what is wrong with you? And I was just like, dude, my knees hurt. And they always hurt. like doing pretty much everything. And I just remember being like, this dude is weird. And from that day on, I've only listened to weird people, because to me, and even if somebody's talking about a strength coach or somebody in this industry, I'm like, that's one of my first questions. It's like, is this dude weird? Like we almost need him to be weird, meaning that he is thinking outside the box and that he will like treat this as a true investigative process.
Well, I mean, I think you just hit on a whole bunch of things right there, right? Because, one of the, is where a culture, well, first thing is you have to remember that established medicine and strength and conditioning and athletic training, all that is built in silos, right? And one of the things that makes my approach unique is I got my hand in a bunch of different silos, right? As a licensed massage therapist, I get to put my hands on people and see tissue quality, right? As a strength and conditioning coach, my brain is thinking optimized movement, strength, performance, metabolic, da, 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 da. And then just as a human being and as a coach, how can you not be part of the mental side, right? And then, you start bringing into, all of the other things that naturally play into that, right? Sleep and, diet, hydration, like it, and I actually, there was a point in my career when I was looking to go back to school to become, quote unquote, a professional in something, right? And everyone that I talked to in the field that I was looking to go into was going, don't do it, man. like you're going to get put into a silo and you're already doing what it is you think you want to do. Just keep getting better at it, right? And so, that that thing of me saying, I want it in your own words really went back to when you start labeling things, right? You have X, you have Y. Well, then that's it. You have it. And there's just so many areas in life where that all of a sudden gives you either an excuse or a restriction, right? The number of times
Yeah.
I've heard somebody go, oh, I've got blankety blank, in my spine. Okay. Or because here's the thing to remember too, when you're going to the medical system, they've, for decades, they've sold themselves as having the answers. So if you go there, part of them feels like their job is to go, well, I got to give you something.
Yeah.
Because if I don't, then I haven't done my job. Well, as soon as you give them that something, and then now all of a sudden you put that person in that box. So for me, the number of times I've had clients come to me just like you and give me this long laundry list of all of the reasons why they can't.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, well, that's where, I always joke with people, this is my MRI right here, right? When I watch you move, I already got a good idea what's going on from my perspective, my experience. And then when I put my hands on you and I feel that tissue quality, that tells me a whole bunch of other things, right? And so then now let's redefine your pain and what's going on from that perspective. Because if what's causing you dysfunction is your tissue quality, well, then there's something we can do about that. So yes, you still may have X, Y, and Z, but let's see what happens if we improve your tissue quality. Let's see what happens
And
when
that's much
so.
more empowering, which is a huge
Oh,
part of the process.
100%.
It goes right back to hope. Is like, if you don't have hope, how am I supposed to buy into this process of change if I'm not empowered to do anything about the status of my joints?
Hey, Dennis, the first thing I tell every athlete, every person that comes into me, and when I talk about athletes today, people, well, I can't come see you, the majority of my clients, I used to say are 35 to 55-year-old professionals, but now a lot of them have been with me for 20 years. So now, right, when I say everybody in my mind is an athlete on a continuum,
Yeah.
age-wise and ability-wise. Why? Because to me, an athlete is a human being moving through time and space, wanting to do things with their body. Sometimes on a basketball court, sometimes, shopping, sometimes carrying a kid, like, bombing down a hill on a snowboard, which I love to do now. Like, there's so many ways you can be an athlete, right? And so, when I get somebody on my table, the first thing I'll do my little investigation, this and that, and then they're on the table and we're about to start, doing some stuff. And I'll look at them, I'll go, look, you're in charge. I don't want you handing your body over to me or anyone else. I can't fix you today. I'm starting you on a journey of you
Mm.
fixing yourself. I'm going to give you tools, resources, and ideas of how to fix it. But in the end, I can't fix you today or any other day. Now, if you just got in a car wreck and you got, limbs going this way and that way, all right, bring me into the ortho, fix me, fix me.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a lot of chronic movement overuse related injuries, it's not a fix. You're not a Camry. We don't bring you into the auto and say, oh, we got to swap out this transmission. The analogy
And
I
is
use all the time is you're a gardener and you got to start tending to your garden.
and I use that a very similar analogy a lot of like we see a lot of exercises on Instagram and stuff where it's like this is the magic thing that will fix these things. But it doesn't usually work unless somebody attaches their own intuition. And because I do a lot of virtual training, that's one of the first things that I have to establish with somebody is like, I'm handing over all the information that I know, but if you don't attach your own intuition to this process, then again, you're capped at a certain threshold of just like how inherently good the exercise is, which it usually isn't that special, but if somebody is very locked in and attentive and they use their intuition to like listen to pain and then use that to address whatever dysfunction is causing that pain, then I think
Right.
the progress skyrockets.
Right. No. I mean, you have to take ownership. The analogy I use all the time is like, look, it's not the ingredients. It's the recipe you're following and you putting it together, right? And I'm giving you a bunch of different ingredients. Ultimately, you are going to be the chef and you've got to take ownership of this dish. And, and if you hand that over and early on, particularly young athletes or, it's okay to hand over that process to another chef, right? But understand as best you can understand, right? When I try to explain things to people, I try to explain them to the level and that they can, as much or as
Mm.
little as they can handle, right? I don't speak Latinese anymore. The last time I spoke Latinese was when I was in massage therapy school and I had to remember all the muscles and the attachments and the origin of the. Nobody is going to remember any Latin I talked to them about. No one is going to remember the in-depth Krebs cycle stuff I had to learn to get my CSCS. They don't know and they don't care. And that's fine. They don't need to geek out on that. But I have to be able to break down those principles or those ideas or whatever I'm working with in a way that makes that go, aha, okay, I get it. This is how, this is why for me,
Yeah.
So yeah,
A
100%
true
ownership.
genius. A
Yeah.
true genius can be able to break something down into simple terms and explain it.
Well,
And I think I've
I'm
noticed that
not going to
along.
take that. I'm not going to take that title. So,
What is your title?
oh, people ask me all the time, what do Hank, what do you do? What's your title? So the name of my studio is A Better Day Performance. And I named it that because I was at a loss at one point when I was working at a big club about, why did people come stay with me? Because, early on in the industry, being a personal trainer was all about shedding the fat away, right?
Yeah.
And posting anywhere you could, look at this guy lost 50 pounds, 100 pounds, this and that. And I was like, my clients aren't doing that, and so having this conversation and like the theme that came back was basically, hey, we're coming to you for all of these other reasons. Right. And so my approach is, I want people to have a better day. When they come into my studio and they leave mentally, physically, and emotionally, I want them to have a better day. And that's going to be different every time, depending on how somebody, is coming in there. And I lost the original question. Give me that. Give me, what was
What is your
the
title?
full question? So
What
my
is your
title,
and
so my title, that's how I got down that rabbit hole. It depends who walks through that door, right? Sometimes my title's a therapist. Sometimes my title's coach. I've been called Mr. Miyagi. I've been called a wizard. I've been called the muscle whisperer. Um, it's, I like the title coach. Because I think that's what I try to do. And for me, what a coach is saying, look, I've got tools and understandings for a problem you're trying to solve. And
Mhm.
my goal is to give that to you so that you make it your own, right? What's a good basketball skills coach? They might not be the best player in the world, but they
Mm.
know whatever that skill is. And they're saying, hey, I'm going to coach you up so that you take that skill as your own. Well, when it comes to performance and pain and lifestyle change, that's what I'm doing as a coach. When I may be putting my hands on you as a therapist, when you're on my table, but I'm coaching you through that process. Hey, we need to get you breathing from your diaphragm. Why? Well, your diaphragm down regulates your nervous system. If you're
Mm.
sitting there on the table breathing up with your chest, I said, you feel your body tensing? And they're like, yeah. I said, well, do you think I'm going to be able to get you to your muscles to relax and come out of a spasm if you're telling your nervous system something bad's about to happen? And they're like, no. Well, what am I doing there? I'm coaching, right? I'm coaching that person to recognize first, where am I at? A little just mindfulness. Let me stop for a minute. Oh, wow, I am holding a lot of tension here. Oh,
Mhm.
now I can use my diaphragmatic breath. Ooh. And now they start down regulating, right? And then I put my hands on and I do this and I do that. And while a lot of times while I'm doing that, I'm coaching, meaning I'm explaining and telling people how and why, what we're doing, because ultimately when I give them their self-care, I go, remember when we did X, Y, and Z on the table? Yes. This is how you're going to do it on your own. Right. And so
And they
I
they
think,
have felt the importance of doing those things.
right. And so I think coach is the broadest, because if you said, oh, well, Hank's a massage therapist, all of the time I have to tell people that come and, will find me through some Google search or something and go, hey, I'm looking for a sports massage. And I have to tell them, look, if you're looking for somebody to rub you down with
While you're
deep
just,
elbows and all of this and that while you're checking out, then
yeah,
hey, I've got some friends that do an excellent job. Here, check them out. If you have a specific pain or performance problem you're trying to get better at, then come on in. And,
yeah,
and they're like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, look, I guarantee my work. If you have a specific outcome you're looking for and you come in and we don't get you there, all right, you know, then go ahead and move on, right? And so, and strength and conditioning, that's another one, right? You say, oh well, your personal trainer, your strength and conditioning coach. You've worked with me long enough, on, when we went through your stuff, like, yeah, do I do exercises? Do I do programming? Yeah, but it's that's not what I
it's a
do,
silo.
right?
That's
It
another.
it's right. I can do as much or as little, right? So like ideally, if you've got, I don't want to be everything to everybody. I don't need to be. There's a lot of great coaches out there. There's a lot of great massage therapists out there. So if somebody's got a great soft tissue person and they're coming to me going, hey, that's dialed in, but I'm still having these problems. And I look at their program and I go, well, it's no wonder you got to go to your massage therapist 3 times a week. If I was doing that, I'd be there every night, right? So then I'm working with that therapist and where I'm taking over the programming and helping the program. Or they might be working with, another coach where their programming is, they really love their programming and they're getting good exercise and they're coming for me to get the soft tissue. And then I'm talking with the programming coach and going, hey, you know, um, I'm, this is happening. Here's a couple of suggestions or thoughts and building that relationship. And so, people call me what they want.
It is. It's funny and it's refreshing to hear you say that, just because in the social media world where I have navigated so far, it's all about the title and about
Yeah.
how you can convey that message as efficiently as possible. So
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many hours I've spent trying to think of a snazzy title just so that people listen to me on social media. Whereas you're over here, like, I get enough referrals from multiple people. Like, for every new client you get, it's not because one person told them, it's because 5 people told them. And that's really cool to hear, because your title doesn't even matter that much, just because all of your business is driven from positive referrals.
Well, but so, I mean, the big thing to remember there though is, right, when you're starting on the digital side, it's all about the algorithm. It's all about your niche. It's all about the marketing, right? And That's why you have to have, who's your avatar? What's their age? And then, da, 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 da. So if that's how you're going to grow a business, then that's the game you have to play. Then title is important, right? Like, I didn't, this wasn't around. What we're doing right now and all of that wasn't even around. I mean, it was a personal business. It was, hey, I'm on the fitness floor. I'm doing what, a version of, what they would call the express line. I'm showing people how to use 15, Nautilus machines. And
Yeah.
they're coming into the gym and I'm meeting people, right? And I loved it. Why? Because I got to master my actual hands-on craft over and over and over, and then just slowly build. I didn't have to be the expert right out of the box. And I say that I'm an expert now with very small little quotes because, I joke all the time. I'm a one-trick pony. It's just a damn good trick. And it's been, I've been doing it over and over. And I'm fortunate enough because of how dysfunctional our youth athletic development is. It's just going to keep coming. And, so, that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
I want to get into the youth development, but I also want to know how you started. So why did you
I mean,
start? When did you start? Talk about like those early years.
well, how far back do you want to go? I was a kid, I had a ball and a dream, but nobody told me Larry Bird was 6'11". It was just, I was like, I grew up, every kid was, we were just balling and balling. So, if I didn't have a basketball in my hand, I was on my BMX bike growing up, right? And so, long story short, which never happens, my wife she watches this, she'll laugh, long story short. So, I had my ball. High school didn't go the way I wanted. I go into the Army. I do my Army thing. I get into powerlifting. So I go from being I take that back. My senior year, talk about my first real exposure to structured strength and conditioning for sports performance, was a guy by the name of Bill Dunn. He was a strong man. He was actually the strength and conditioning coach at Virginia with Ralph Sampson. And he ended up writing a book, a fabulous book on basketball strength and conditioning. In the late 80s, early 90s, right? And so that's when I started getting, I started doing some strength training, but then long story short, now I go into the Army, I get into powerlifting, and then I keep playing ball, and guys are like, where did you learn to shoot like that? Because now I'm walking around 6'2", 220, but I'm passing and shooting like a 175-pound point guard, and there's like a disconnect. And I started questioning myself, and I'm kind of going, what would happen? And then, so one of the things that happened, how I got into all the strength conditioning on a real scientific level, is when I was in the Army, I was in Desert Storm. While I was sitting in the Desert Storm waiting for everything to go down, I would write letters to companies and say, hey, my name's Private Degroat. I'm sitting here in the middle of the desert in my Bradley with the other infantrymen, and da. And so one of the companies that I wrote to was a publisher for strength and fitness. And they sent me a box of secondary books. So Fred Hatfield, was a big scientific powerlifter writer guy, right? So I started just devouring all this stuff. So by the time I got out, that's when I'm this big powerlifting guy. And when I went to college, I was spending half of my time in the stacks, the library stacks. No Google, right? I'm pulling books off the shelves. I'm reading about how to be bigger, faster, stronger, jump higher. And then one day I just said, I wonder what if. I never played my best game. What if I took all the information and knowledge I have and tried to be the best basketball player I could be? So I went from being a 220-pound powerlifter back to a 175-pound point guard. And applied everything that I knew. And then that took me eventually out to the University of Idaho. I had my little Rudy walk-on experience. And I remember the first time I got on a court with, all Division I level athletes. And I was just like, okay, I've just played my best game. And like this guy, they didn't have a 7-footer like you, Dennis, but they had some big boys out there. I'm going, he's faster than me. I'm like, okay, there is no, I'm not going to go, there's going to be no regrets in my life. I'm not going to wonder what if. There's no hidden John Stockton that I've missed out on because of X, Y, or Z. And so that journey of me trying to bring out the best in myself is, what, goes even back to my Karate Kid days when I went to old school karate where there were no black belts for kids, right? I went to an adult class because there were no kids classes, but I digress, meaning just simply that human performance has been something I've been striving for. And then when I went back to college and I ended up just to get my damn degree, as my father would say, with a philosophy degree. And I was going to double up with an exercise major, but I was just like, I just want to get something, I just want to finish up. And so people used to ask me, well, what are you going to do when you graduate? And I don't know, right? I knew I wanted to go to massage therapy school because at that point, I knew there was something about going that direction I wanted to go. So I ended up going to massage therapy school. And then I got in my car and I said, California is the place that has everything I want. It's got martial arts. It's the mecca of strength and conditioning, and it's the mecca of body work. So I got in my car, and at that time, so we're talking 2000. No, 1999. Yeah, 2000. I got in my car. Girlfriend at the time, drove her to New Mexico, left her at her house. She went on and did her thing out in Honduras. She went to Honduras for a little while. I went to California, living out of my car, and I would sleep in an MMA gym. So I'm studying for my CSCS, training with the fighters in the morning, and in the afternoon, I would knock on doors and go to different strength and conditioning people, different bodywork people, say, what are you doing? Why? I want to learn from you. Can I watch? Da, 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 da. And studying for my CSCS. Eventually, I started working part-time at a 24-hour fitness. After I passed my CSCS, I met up with a guy by the name of Marv Marinovich, which he's, and
Legend.
he and I had a fabulous year together, where if there was one influence, it was me going to him and going, I don't know what you do. I don't know why you do it, but I know you do things differently. Talk about weird. Marv was a weird fucking dude. He's not weird now because everything that he's doing, everyone's kind of going, it's kind of become the norm. But, and I basically said to him, I'm going to all of these other places and this is how they're doing it. And I think it's kind of broken and messed up. And he's like, yeah, I agree with you. I said, why does a 12-year-old who, why are they learning how to do an overhead split snatch when they can barely get up and down with their own body weight? And he goes, I don't know, and so my time with him, it was just this, there was no one moment, right, of how I got into it. It was just this, the industry didn't exist. I mean, it was just getting going. Right? There was really only two options. You're either going to be a CSCS or you were going to be a fitness instructor. And there wasn't, and it was just kind of getting going. NASM was just starting to roll out all of their suite of certifications, right? And so it was not something I got into thinking I'm going to do this for the next 25 years. It's something I got into and it just really
Kept evolving.
It just kept evolving, and problem solving. That's what it came down to. What's the next problem I'm going to solve? What tools do I need to solve that problem?
So, all right, let's talk about movement and how you and Marv approach this stuff. Because again, what you said was conventional strength and conditioning is let's add load and then progress there. Whereas how I view movement is like you need to be more free and less restricted. And if you look at the best athletes, sometimes the genetic freaks will be able to stay free and without restriction whatever you put them through, whatever exercise you put them through, LeBron is still going to move faster than everybody and jump higher. But
Right.
for kids developing, like, how do you view the process of how do you become a better athlete? Is it in the weight room, or is it something that you inherently have? Is it something that you can train, and how do you train that?
Well, all right. So you're loading up like the 10 different questions you just asked there are each a half hour, right? I'm gonna summarize my time with Marv simply as this. Marv told his big thing from my takeaway from Marv was the big question he asked was, look, I squatted 1,000 pounds. I've gone this big, super strong strength way. It hurt me. I see it hurting a lot of athletes. And why is it that the athletes that I'm working with and that he was working with at the NFL level, when they come back off of rehab, they're going through and testing better and all of these things. So he had those moments of saying, what am I looking to do different and how to look at it? And that's when he kind of stepped back and said, there's something about this nervous system so the analogy I use, the bigger, faster, stronger, which is basically in the traditional sense is from if we were building a car, we got a dragster and a Porsche. A dragster says horsepower, 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 right? A Porsche says, yeah, I need 500, 600 horsepower maybe. Maybe I only need 300, but I need to stop, start, handle, corner. The dragster says, I don't need any of that. I just got to go straight. Well, what traditional, and this is where when you start looking at the history of strength and conditioning and see all the different cycles we've gone through, right? When strength and conditioning first came in, it came in with a very basic powerlifting or Olympic lifting background. Well, they're excellent at making big engines that go fast. And
True.
right. But that's the only way that you go, then, and to what detriment? Because if you're building a rally car, you don't need 1,000 horsepower. And so I think Marv's biggest thing during his time was he recognized, hey, there's more to it. And I think he was the beneficiary of. One of the reasons why he was able to have such success with a number of athletes is because they're a number of more phenomenal athletes, but B, a lot of them already came having gone through a traditional system. So they had they could afford to lose a bunch of base level strength.
True.
They had already gotten up to their 1,000. So now Marv says, we don't need all that. We're going to bring you down to 500. And now we're going to give you some new shots. We're going to give you some new handling. We're going to get your brakes working. Wow. That's a very different athlete, right? And so that's how I would say, Marv and I, we did a lot of this.
Which I think you need.
And yeah, well, and it was good. And a lot of times, and it wasn't because I disagreed with him. It's that I didn't agree with the way he framed things or framed other coaches, necessarily. And that's, rest in peace, Marv. One of my I will give Marv credit wherever I can because for me personally and my relationship with him, it was a good one. And I learned a lot from him. But as far as those next questions, right, about development, I look at athletes all the time and I look at their parents when they come in the door and I go, look, I can't make you better. And they're like, what do you mean? We heard you did it. And I go, look, I know there's a lot of strength and conditioning coaches out there that are going to say, you want to level up. You want to get to that next. And I'm like, they're full of shit. I said, look, the way I look at it, you've got a D3, D2, or a D1 nervous system. Body type. Like, I can't coach 7 foot that can run a 5-minute mile, Dennis, right? You were who you were. You passed the look test. You passed the genetic test, right? Do you know how many hardworking 5'10" to 6 foot semi-athletic basketball players there are out there? Do you know how many of them I can make into you, or I can make into Alani, who can just, I can't, right? And so at best, a strength and conditioning coach can bring you to the top of your level.
Yeah.
But they can't take a guy who's a Division III and make them a Division I. And even within Division I, there's levels to the levels, right?
Yeah.
I was overwhelmed by the Division I level athletes at the University of Idaho. Shit, I probably would have had a heart attack and a panic attack if I'd been on North Carolina's floor, right? I mean, I'll have to tell you, you've played with the best freak athletes that are out there, right? And you could, and when you talk about just how freak genetics are, go on YouTube and watch any of the, regular Joe versus pro. People rag Scalabrini, when he was here with the Celtics. Oh, he's not athletic. He's not this. He's not that. Scalabrini goes to any pickup game with any Division I guys that are there.
Cooks them.
And he puts them to sleep. And it's like, and so when it comes to the development side, I think there's a big difference between, all right, athletic development, where can we take you? And then human development. What are we doing to our children? Right? And that is there. Like, we need, in my mind, we need to go back to the 50s in that regard. Right? When you look, I come across kids that don't know how to skip.
Damn.
They want to go and be an all-star on the soccer field, the basketball, or this or that. They don't even have the mechanics to skip.
Yeah.
And so
let me challenge that. I guess that belief system, right? Because one of the things that I believe is that everybody is made to be athletic, and that's something that you mentioned before. Whereas, I think evolutionarily we're supposed to be movers, but maybe in the last 100 years that has drastically changed. So now when
50.
you talk about somebody's ceiling, I think that ceiling has decreased or been capped by the things that limit you, like malpractice in the weight room or just sedentary lifestyle. So in reality, what we're doing is we are raising their ceiling by getting rid of those restrictions, right?
Right.
So
Go ahead.
For young guys, is there a way to train the nervous system to kind of unlock more of your genetics?
Yes. Oh, 100%. But it's going to. So there isn't a system, right? Like it all depends on, and because there's a big difference between a kid coming to me who's a couch potato and soft and hasn't done much of anything versus a kid who's been working on a farm. What they need to do to up their nervous system, and you take a kid who's grown up running around, lifting things, jumping, their tendon structure and what they're going to be able to do is going to be entirely different, right? So to get to accelerate their nervous system even more, you're going to be able to start and do different things than this kid who is literally just soft. And, and you got to go way back and do very basic things. It's not about, you got to do box jumps to improve their plyometrics. It's like, oh no, you've got to be able to just jump rope, right? Like you can't, your body can't support you doing that, right? And so if you want to look at, are there ways to develop these things? Go look at what, a bunch of the European countries are doing. Look at what the Chinese are doing. They have actual physical education that starts in elementary that is designed. Look at the Nordic countries, like, New Zealand. They have physical education systems that are designed to teach children how to move, how to be strong, how to be resilient, how to improve eye-hand coordination. A classic example. Here's to stupendous stuff be trained. I had a family come to me and they said their 9-year-old was a prodigy on the violin. But he's prodigy on the violin. But there's something about, he doesn't run good, coach. He doesn't run good, and he can't catch. He just can't catch. And I go, okay. So I watch him, and he's got these really nice expensive shoes on, and he's running, and sure enough, it looks like he's got bricks on his feet. And I'm going, okay, well, yeah, if he's running like that in gym class, I would see why somebody would go, right? So then I take him, at the time I was at a place that had squash courts. I take him into the squash court and I throw him a ball and he's like, freaking out. And I'm like, all
Mm.
right, well, he's got glasses. Maybe it's the glass thing. So I just break it down and then we slowly. So I go, all right, let me try a few things. So I take off his shoes and I give him a few cues. All of a sudden he's running like any other child, right? I show him like basketball 101 and I let him sit inside the squash court and start doing and he starts learning the rhythm. He starts getting that depth perception, right?
And
After
that
one
was
session,
unlocked by
that
the
was
feet?
unlocked. That was unlocked by the fact his nervous system had never been exposed to those simple things.
Yeah.
His feet were locked, so he was getting no proper input into his feet. So his body was just trying to stay up and do what it was supposed to. And as soon as we brought the feet in, well, now the toes are letting the ankles and the hips know, and so he can run
And
a little more
your
fluid.
proprioception, everything works better with
Right.
that.
And then, the same thing with the ball. He wasn't that he had bad athleticism. He couldn't catch. It's a learned skill. Learning, dealing, that's a complex. Now, can some kids do it a little bit better than others? Yes. But the more time something comes at you and you practice that depth perception and all the other little micro things that happen there, right? So, long story short, 6 weeks later, doing his homework and coming to see me once a week, he was an entirely different kid. And I just said to the parents, how often does he practice his violin? Well, during the school year, he only practices 4 hours. During the school year, he only practices violin 4 hours. Well, now would you question my athleticism if you tried to give me a violin and it sounded like dead cats? No, you would say, you need to practice.
More reps.
So why are we going to say somebody's basic athleticism is they're not an that's one of the biggest problems with our culture. We separate people again, athletic, not athletic. No, you put human beings in a challenging physical environment. They're going to problem solve kinesthetically to figure it out. And the more you do that, now, just like playing a violin, are there going to be people who pick it up and it comes more natural and this and that? Absolutely. But, when it comes to movement, we are basically, it's the equivalent of we don't practice violin playing. That's why we don't have a lot of violin playing.
Yeah.
Children and human beings do so little movement now they don't realize to your point, where that base really is. They think their base is here. And it's like, no, your base is actually way up here with just a little bit of consistent stimulus. And that's why I said we need to go back to the 50s when you look at the physicalness
Kids just
of
played.
they played, they ran, they jumped, and they had a base level of coordination and movement that a lot of kids sadly don't have because we've separated into specialization.
Yeah, and so I also think that that's something that American athletes will do better than European and Asian countries because they have a better system, but the kids that grow up in the system don't know how to play. You know what I mean? They don't have as much improvisational skills as we do, at least at our best, right? Like we do have the problems.
But I think some of that, dude, your generation might have been like the borderline crossover where you were still allowed to play. Like there's a lot of kids today. I had to teach my kids. I had to teach my son how to play pickup. How do you go to a neighborhood place and go, I got next? How do you go grab guys, right? Like that was something I had because it's something I learned naturally, right? Naturally meaning the environments I grew in, that's how it was, and so I think what you're describing traditionally was true, but who are some of the sickest, most improvisational passers in the NBA right now? Bigs, point guards.
And so I want to segue this into the pain process because I read a really cool quote in one of the books that talks about trauma, and it's the opposite of trauma is play. And so, like, I view trauma as a process, not necessarily something that happened, but almost like your body's response to that thing that happened. So when we talk about chronic pain and injury, my trauma response is my body locking up, my nervous system locking up. And they said the opposite of that is just going to play, where you're almost careless and you're able to kind of just access that parasympathetic ease while you are improvisational, reacting and just like creating. And I think that's really cool. What do you think about that in terms of the rehab process?
Well, 100%, right? Like I said earlier, I'm always coaching, right? And one of the things that is I'm always coaching is like, hey, we got to downregulate your nervous system, right? If you're dealing with chronic pain or trauma or an acute pain, your brain and your body went, oh shit. And
Yeah.
if you don't know how to turn the on switch off, if you don't go through the physical processes, I don't, I'm terrible with names, but the book is eluding me. Something Tiger. It's about trauma. But, he just basically says, look, look at the gazelle. The gazelle gets chased by the lion and then it shakes it off and then it goes back, right? There's a physiological response. So if you think about historically when we would go through a traumatic event, what followed? A huge physical exertion of some form,
Yeah.
either,
Yeah.
right? And what
Fight or
happens when we
run.
give a big physical, right? What happens with that big physical exertion? We have this, neurochemical flood that helps to reset everything. The problem with our modern culture is we can experience so much different trauma that doesn't require that physical response to it,
Yeah.
right? So then that just keeps it locked in. And so the play aspect of getting out of that and letting that movement come back in is just playing. You could just play to distract yourself from the trauma and not work through it. But if you're very proactive, you use the play in the part with the trauma, right? That's one of the reasons why I love the pool for you and
Yeah.
all the athletes who are coming out of, being in a traumatic environment. Every time I get on the court, I feel pain. Okay, well, let's play in this environment where we're moving our body the same way, but you're not experiencing the pain. So now we're rewiring that nervous system. We're rewiring you mentally, physically, and emotionally to what movement is. Because for the year and a half or the year or 2 years before I met you, everything was pain. But when I got you into the pool, you're like, oh, wait, I can move and it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
And you start building that rewiring, starts to take place, the plasticity of the nervous system, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
no, 100%,
All
100%.
right.
I agree with that.
We're running out of time. I feel like we need to do 3 more chapters of this
Oh,
podcast.
absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
For now, let's say there's another Dennis Clifford out there that is listening to this podcast. He is lifting. He is trying to become a better athlete. He is experiencing knee pain. He's in the same mental state of mind. What is like a message or something that he could do right now? Because a lot of people hit me up, hey, like, I'm in it. I need something. Like, I need help. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, what
Is
I would
there a
first
magic
say,
exercise?
well, number one, there's no magic exercise. There might be a magic exercise. It's just like, is there a magic ingredient, right? You make this wonderful soup, but it tastes bland, and somebody comes by and throws in a teaspoon of salt, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, and you're like, fucking salt, like what's the big deal? Like that's, could it be that simple, right? Hey, why are you doing legs on this day? Do it on that day, or add this before you do that. It could be that simple. The bottom line is this. What I would say to all athletes is, if you have to roll out and do all of these different things before a simple workout, you have to look at the overall structure of your programming and your workload. And you have to come up with a recipe that actually fits your lifestyle, your ability to recover, and and where you're at from an injury. Being your best isn't just grinding through and pushing, right? In the same way that, I use the recipe analogy all the time. Look, a great sugar cookie takes 3 ingredients, and you don't even need the best ingredients. You just need them in the right proportions to have a fabulous treat. So if you are in chronic pain, if things aren't working, well, I'd start by stopping doing what I've been doing
Yeah.
and say, okay,
That's
this
really good.
shouldn't be the case. And then I
That's
would
really good.
re-engineer and start to say, okay, I always want to get an athlete back to moving pain-free, right? And enjoying movement. I had a kid on my table yesterday, D1 athlete. I looked at him, I said, when's the last time you had fun playing basketball? He
At
couldn't
what
remember.
age?
He couldn't remember. I go, you're a sophomore. You're a sophomore in college. When's the last time? He couldn't
No, that
remember.
one
This
definitely
kid's
hit home for a lot of people.
right. And I said, look, our first number one goal is to have you moving pain free. We'll worry about getting you better once we know you can move. Because once you can move pain free, you're going to be playing better.
Absolutely.
You're automatic.
My
And so
play,
once you're, and
my play was always
then we will
predicated.
build,
Yeah, my play was always
right? And
predicated
so
on how good my legs felt, which
okay.
is
And that's what
crazy.
that's there. If you are not playing fast and free, pain free, you're not playing your best. I don't care how good your programming is. If you're getting
Or
onto the
how
court,
big your deadlift is.
you know, and here's the other thing. Everyone, I call it add-on training, right? If I add this on, this on, this on, this on, then that's going to make up for this. No, no. There's only so much recovery work you can do that's going to facilitate your body responding quicker,
Yeah.
right? And that's where you've got to get proper dosing and recovery. And that's where,
No,
we haven't even gotten
that's
into, all of that stuff. And so if you are in pain playing, number one, it's not your fault in the sense of you're doing something wrong, particularly if you're following other people's programming. And number two, what I would say is, less is more. Don't try to figure out how much you can do. Try to figure out how little you need to do.
mm, that's really good. Yeah, that makes perfect sense because I already know a lot of people in my audience are European basketball players, and they have to roll out for an hour before practice. They got to do yoga and they got to do all these corrective things before every single practice. And in Europe, you're practicing twice a day. It doesn't matter what day of the week it is. It doesn't matter if you have a game tomorrow. So now it's like instead of
Well,
being
so
in the gym for
that's
4 hours,
yeah. Well,
instead of being in the
that's
gym for 4 hours, you have to now be in the gym for 7 hours because of all of the things that you have to do just to keep your body intact.
well, but that's a very different, like, that athlete is in their job and they're being saying, hey, you either do this or you don't. So yes, they may need to do an hour of prep of assisted recovery, if you will, so that they can get to the next. If we're talking about a high school or a college kid in America, I mean, I had a kid come to me, goes, I can't walk, my knees are killing me. I said, all right, well, tell me, what have you been up to? The kid shot 1,000 jump shots in a
Every
day.
morning. Oh.
No, just like, he was already teetering on paying things, but then he's like, I can't do it. I was like, well, why did you shoot 1,000? I said, well, I asked him, when did it start to hurt? I don't know. I said, after 100? No. I said, after 500? Yeah. Well, why'd you do another 500? Because I got to grind. I got to get better. It's like, there's a point of diminished return,
Yeah.
but that's a whole
And
other thing.
the best shooters will tell you 200 really good makes every day on a consistent basis is way better than any type of crazy ass shooting workout.
So what I would say to the Dennis Clifford that is out there, I'm going to speak to two different ones. If I'm saying it to the pro, what I'm saying is, look, you got to go by, almost any means legally necessary to figure out how to accelerate your recovery process and what works for you. It might be the hot tubs in the cold plunge with this massage or that massage, electric stim, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Getting enough sleep, not getting getting the nutrition. You've got to figure out your rhythm. We're not even throwing in all the travel and all of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Now, but if I'm talking to the athlete who's a high school or a college athlete and they're in chronic pain all the time because of their sport, then less is more. You have to reevaluate everything you're doing because if you're in chronic pain, your workload is too much. And and doing more is not going to make you better because you're setting yourself back.
Yeah. And
And so,
I think you can increase your foundation or at least strengthen it enough to increase workload. But if the
yes,
workload is exceeding your capacity, either locally or systemically, then you run into a lot of problems.
100%. But we live in our, from a youth athletic development standpoint, it is such a train wreck, and the overuse injuries are just, and the acceptance of chronic pain as being part of the grind, um, is bullshit. And,
Yeah.
but it takes a lot to show and empower, right? Like that's one of the things, again, from a coaching standpoint, somebody comes in, well, why do you need to lift? Because I need to get bigger. Why? Because I need to be stronger on the court. Well, then I show them how to biomechanically be stronger without lifting any weights. And all of a sudden they're like, and I go, but here's the reason why you're not able to do that on the court. Because you can't get your hips where they need to be.
Yeah.
Because your hips are so tight. And here's why they're tight. And here's what we need to do. So then after one session of addressing that, they go, oh, right. So we didn't answer fully your question. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. The bottom line is this. I've got somebody waiting on the other side of this phone.
Yeah.
who is
Awesome, bro.
waiting for me to go. So we can keep this. We got the ball rolling. I'm happy to, as you can tell, you get me talking about this stuff. I love it. And I'll talk all day about it. Because I do think it's in my mind for the youth athletes now, when I grew up, there was no information or bad information. The problem now is there's too much information, and kids don't know how to organize it, who to listen to, how to listen to.
They
And,
shouldn't have to. Yeah.
right. Well, and what I would say is how do we empower more individuals to take it on, not feel overwhelmed, and become the master chef in their own kitchen?
By playing
One ingredient at a time, one recipe at a time.
one
How
rep.
do I learn and develop? Right.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to end it. This is just chapter one, Hank. I want to thank you again for coming
Yep.
on,
My
but
pleasure, Dennis.
also, just like I said before, I tell everybody when I tell my story, it's you are the tipping point. Like you are the person that saved my life. So I can't thank you enough for all of those crazy ass sessions that we had.
Hey, well, I'm happy to be a weird guy, and I'm so glad to have been part of your journey. It's been a blast, and the blessings that I've received because of our relationship, in my life, and all of the other things. So we could do a whole thing on just on all of that business. But all right, let's cut it off, call it a good one, and we will see you the next time.
Next time. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you
All
again.
right. Be well, Dennis. Good to see you.
Yep. You too.